the functions of the body. And so when there's a need for healing, he might give the gift of healing to one person. He may give it to many. It's not a widespread gift, or tongues necessarily is not a widespread gift, but he gives it according to those who can handle the gift, lest they should fall, or like Father Dave was saying, lest they hinder the worship of the church. So, again, they're beautiful, because they are directly from God. They're beyond our own abilities. None of us, even though I'm a physician, I can't just heal people. The people that do that, they get it from God. So we acknowledge that when God gives something special, that it's given to him by the Holy Spirit, and we admire it and honor it. But again, what's more important is the fruit rather than the gift.
I didn't know you're a physician. That's cool. See, God healing hand the other way. So, because I got a pain right here, and I want to just let me know what that is. No, I'm just kidding. That's good though. I get what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
You agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay. Yeah, I don't think that you can just be one healer and there's just a healer. I think that God, he does. He gives certain gifts at a certain time when it's needed. I believe that. And I came from a Pentecostal background, so yeah, I've witnessed a lot of that growing up. I've witnessed like my mother speaking in tongues and other people hearing their own language, in her speaking in tongues is like a completely different, and they're hearing their own language of her praising God, and they're like, how did you know my language? And mom's like, I don't. So I've seen it be done and growing up as a child. So my next question I wanted to ask is about the Orthodox Bible that you guys use. I know that the Old Testament is in the Septuagint, right? And the New Testament is it the Stephanus 1550 edition of
it's the New King James.
Oh, it is? Okay. Yeah, okay. Can you explain a little bit about that? About the Septuagint?
The Septuagint was a translation that was kind of ordered by Ptolemy. He was one of the rulers in the Roman Empire, and he gathered all these Jewish elders, 70 scribes, to come to Egypt and translate the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. And so the early church, if you look at a lot of the references in the New Testament that the apostles or Christ himself used, he didn't speak Greek necessarily, but the references to the Old Testament oftentimes are in the Septuagint tradition. And so it was the tradition or the translation that was often used in the very early church. Not everyone could read Hebrew. Greek was a more widespread language at that time. And so that's why it was used and to speak to the Gentiles. And also our Bible does not only have 66 books. We have a second set of books. They're called the Deuterocanonical books. They were part of the early translation. There's a number of books that are from the Old Testament that were translated also, and were part of the early canons, but were kind of left out during the translation by Martin Luther and some of the other reformers. And so those didn't make it into the canon. Apparently, they were actually part of the canon in most Bibles up until about the 1800s, even in America. And then they just decided to add those to the Bible.
What books are those?
So there are books like Sirach, Baruch, Wisdom of Solomon. There is a portion of Daniel, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, Judith, Tobit, and I think, are there about, is it 12? It depends on how you count. There's portions of some books and
got some priests right here. You guys got to be right.
No, I'm just kidding. No. 1st and 2nd sometimes.
Okay, yeah. I'm just playing with you.
Okay, that's perfect. I like to study I have a Septuagint too, and I like to read from it and, just get a good understanding of it, like the Hebrew and the Greek.
Most of the quotations in the New Testament are from the Septuagint.
Yeah.
And the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest translation of the Hebrew scriptures that they found, are closer to actually the Septuagint rather than the Masoretic. Mm-hmm. So that's something really interesting as you look into that. And even there's in the book of Jude, when it mentions of the body of Moses and where that was located and how, Michael the Archangel, that's from one of the deuterocanonical books that are not written in the Old Testament or considered part of the regular, King James Old Testament, but are part of the Septuagint writings.
Really quick, can you repeat those? Somebody on press wanted to ask what those name of those books were again?
Mm-hmm. So there's Judith, Wisdom, Tobit, Sirach, Baruch, 1st and 2nd Maccabees.
That's awesome. There you go.
Can you explain to me, because you guys have a pope, right? Can you explain to me the importance of having a pope?
You see throughout, even in the scriptures, there was kind of a leader, so even though St. Peter was not, officially titled the head of the church or anything like that, but he kind of took the lead amongst the disciples, and even Christ told him, You strengthen your brethren. He gave them these roles. So we don't have any kind of understanding that the Pope is infallible. Never have we said anything like that. Never will we say anything like that. Even on church doctrine, in no way. But he's kind of, a spiritual father. So as St. Paul planted churches, and he would, tell those who were with him, let's go check on the churches that we ministered to. So he's kind of like a shepherd that's got kind of overseeing the whole church. A bishop, he's actually a title of a bishop, which is so he's equal to every other bishop, but he's kind of the head of it. Yeah. And so even in the book of Acts, when they had the council to decide whether they're going to take the Jewish practices, does a person have to become Jewish before they became Christian? James was kind of the head of the church, and it wasn't James, it was James the Lord's brother. He was kind of the head of the church at the time, even though there was disciples. So he was the bishop of Jerusalem. So there was, as we see throughout the Bible, in the New Testament, that there was that setup where there's bishop, elders or presbyters, deacons. So he is the head bishop.
Yeah. No, we totally understand that.
The word pope actually is originated from the Coptic language, where it means papa. And so originally there would be one bishop in every area. And when the church grew, there was a need to have more than one bishop. So they said, well, what do we do? So they eventually made one to be the head of them in the church. Where did the word papa come from? When the bishop in Alexandria was exiled so many times, and he would come back.
Because of persecution.
Because of the persecution, when he came back, they called him Papa. And so he became the Papa, or the father of the church. And so that word Pope was reserved for like the head of the bishops. And so the word Pope actually is more Coptic in origin than it is, maybe people associate it with the Roman Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And this is another thing, sometimes when you hear the word Father in the Orthodox Church or Pope, you automatically say, when God said, we talked about this last time.
Yeah.
We don't mean it's a literal, but what we mean, what we believe that Christ meant is that you don't call anyone Father and replacing God. But there is a Father, there is a spiritual Father, and St. Paul talks about that. Have 10,000 instructors, but not many fathers, right? And St. Paul said to Timothy, Timothy, my son. And so we see that there is a fatherly spiritual atmosphere that we see throughout the New Testament.
And it's cool because that technology is cool, because they were asking, is the Pope infallible like this? But you guys said no.
Absolutely not.
So your answer out there on Periscope is no. And just to kind of piggyback on what you're saying is I totally understand, because we were taught this in the school of ministry about the bishop and the way it's set up to just it's like running an organization, but you have to have the one strong leaders and leaders under them, just like Christ set up. It was Christ, and there was the 12, and then they had their crews and all that. So it's like a total business structure when you look at it. But anyways,
and when you see it, sorry,
no, go ahead.
But when you see even the structure of our church, there is a balance of power too. Yeah. So God forbid, but if the Pope started, saying all these teachings that are not necessarily biblical, we have the Holy Synod, which are made up the bishops, and they could remove the Pope, or they could, correct him, and so there's this beautiful balance of power, similar to what we see in the United States. So there is no dictatorship or anything where this person is infallible and just kind of runs the show, and everybody has to answer to him.
And that's necessary everywhere, because you can't, because somebody, like you said, even in the gifts, somebody starts feeling like I could pray for you and heal you, like the guy, magic and all this, I'm doing this, and it can get out of hand, and it can. I mean, I believe that sometimes people will even have given the gift of healing, they have done it, but then they got so out of control that now it's ridiculous. But what I wanted to say was, like, even in are you familiar with Church of God in Christ?
I've heard it.
So there's this, so Charles E. Blake, West Angeles Church, they are, they're in Los Angeles, but he is the presiding bishop of that church. And there's, there are black churches, predominantly black churches, right? All around the United States. And he is the presiding, and they vote him in and stuff like that. So he is the bishop of the bishops for right now. But again, they have to vote him in, and they have to, adhere to rules, and it's like what he says is not all in, like I'm saying this and that's it, because that's crazy, right? But what God says is what's it. But I just want to tell you I like that. Okay, let's do it.
So
it's all back to you, Lazarus.
So what we have is the Pope is chosen for people who are unmarried. So priests, 99% of priests in our church are married. But bishops and the patriarch or the pope, he would be a monk usually, or an unmarried, very rarely an unmarried priest. And so because we see that he would be completely dedicated his life to the service, and he's more of an overseer rather than the personal interconnection, personal relationships that the priests are doing basically in the churches. So he's overseeing an area. And so we basically say he's kind of married to the church. And even in the book of Revelation, when we see, to the angel of the church of Smyrna, to the angel of the church of, of the Ephesus, we consider some of the early church fathers said that this is addressing actually the bishop. So, but anyways, so what would happen is they would narrow the list, and it would eventually get down to 3 names. Okay, and sometimes it would be a general bishop or a monk, and we would pray a liturgy. And at the end of the liturgy, a child will take a name, and this would be our patriarch. Wow. It's a little child, and we say that this is the hand of God that's choosing, because, God calls us to be as the little children. And so, it's such a beautiful practice, and there's this beautiful, there's a power in it, and a simplicity, but also a complete trust in God.
That's actually how they chose the new disciple, right? When they were 12 and Judas was hung himself, how did they choose the new one? They cast lots. Yeah. So that's how they chose the next apostle. That's kind of how we've kept the tradition. And what's interesting about the Pope or the bishops, so we have our 118th Pope. And so who was our first Pope of the Coptic Church?
Mark.
St. Mark. Actually, St. Mark. So what's neat is you can actually trace the lineage and all the churches, that are apostolic. You can trace the popes all the way back to one of the apostles. So it wasn't like someone just out of the blue ordained them. They were chosen by the Pope before them, or the Pope before the Bishop before them, who go all the way back to St. Mark, because St. Paul says, be very careful who you lay your hands on. So it wasn't just anyone. It was very careful, and they had to be connected to, an apostle originally, and that's how it was carried on from the original apostles, at least in our church.
That's interesting you say that, because, Mennonites, are you familiar with Mennonites?
Yeah.
Like Haldeman Mennonites? They say that they can trace all the way back to Peter. And so I read one of their books called This Is My Heritage, and, I always thought that they were a spin-off of Amish, but Amish are actually a spin-off of them, but hopefully we want to get them on a show. Okay. Yeah, because it'd be interesting. I don't know if they want to be filmed or anything like that, but it's all good. But yeah, that's very cool that you say that. So, but prior to, you said that you pick them out, there's several names. So how do those several names get to the pot?
So there would be nominations by different people. Congregations would come, and it's just we see that there was a person who was either serving in the world who was unmarried, serving the world, or was a general bishop. A general bishop, there's a difference between some of the bishops. So we have bishops that are tied to a diocese, and we say that they're married to the diocese. So in Southern California, in Los Angeles, we have a bishop who is now a metropolitan, but he's the bishop of our diocese, and he would not be chosen to be a patriarch because he's already kind of married to this diocese, okay? So sometimes there's general bishops who are in charge of general services. So there's a bishop of education, a bishop of social services, a bishop of, there's different things. And so some of those could be part of the list. And so they would be nominated, and then all the Holy Synod would kind of do their research. Okay, so, does this person qualify? And they would kind of ask them questions and see if they're up to kind of the job, not to that we weed anybody out or see anybody unfit, but a person has to know certain things. They might have to have a certain education. They might be able to speak, especially English, and especially in the time of the day, that we are living in. And so they would narrowed it down to 3, and each of the 3 are very holy men and very blessed, and God chose Pope Tawadros, the 118th patron.
And the unmarried is absolute. That's an absolute.
There was once or twice where they were married, but they were celibate. Even though, so actually,
that's a real man of God right there, to have a wife and be celibate. Come on now.
And I know this is going to bring up a kind of an interesting issue, but we do believe that Saint Mary was an ever virgin. Okay. And even though we see the term brother and sisters, I'm not sure if we talked about this last time, but how we see that Saint Mary was an ever virgin. So this is why I'm bringing this up, because there are cases, and we see this even till in our time and age, that within the Orthodox churches, that there are people who are married that remain celibate, and they would be married for various reasons. Sometimes they would be married to join the service, and they, it's it helps out in the service, but they would choose to live a consecrated life to God. And we believe St. Mary was one of those people. How do we say that?
Oh, no, I was just on that same, just go ahead and finish, but I was going to ask, since you brought up Mary, that was going to be my next question of the importance of Mary to the church. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll say mine and then we can throw this stuff. I'm going to do it because I smoke a lot. So